Hello and welcome to the EF5 podcast. And today, as Cole would say, we have Mr. Rett here, and I flipped roles. We ran Cole out the picture. So we're here to talk about what we've been doing, some of the cool things we've been doing on the side. So we figured, end of the day, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to come in here and talk about a few things. And the one thing is we talk about at Elite all the time is relationships, educate, and value. And how do we do that is the secret, the special sauce, as Cole is nicknamed. So part of that special sauce is one of the unique things we've been working on to try to bring forward, and that was, in a sense, kind of like a book study, a training aid, and one of the books we've been working on is what, Mr. Rett?
It's the third circle theory. We've read a lot of good books here at Elite, a lot of good stories, and a lot of books that tell a lot of really interesting things. But this one here is one of the meatiest in content, I think, that we've really touched on so far. I think we've got.
How would you define meatiest?
Meaty.
That was pretty good.
We got a lot to sink our teeth into. We've had a lot of get-togethers and a lot of conversations together, and with a few other books we've read, it's we get through it and we read it like a story. But with this one, man, I tell you what, we get in there thinking we're going to talk about a couple of chapters, and there's so much to dive into that we'll just get locked up in a couple of really good pages.
Well, some of the other books we read are storytelling type books that kind of have a message to it, so to speak, that have some core principles around it that help kind of translate into what we do every day or our approach to what we're trying to do every day.
Correct.
But this one is a little bit more practical, tangible, like you said, meat, and it's got a lot of meat to it that can really bring forward things that can help you move the ball, not only just at work, but everywhere in life. So
100%.
Yeah, that's cool. So we're actually doing it with one of the other guys that work here, Rohan, and he's involved with it as well. And then Ansley's been helping kind of quantify that a little bit. So then we have a better path of that forward as far as content we want to really focus in. But it's so hard, like you said, because as we dig in each week going through it, we spend an hour each week and we dig in, and it's like, man, it's so much there.
Oh yeah, and I mean, some books, a lot of books, kind of in that genre, I feel like are really great at teaching you good work ethic and good work habits. But this one, like you said, just covers so many expansive topics in life, in work, in relationships. It's just so applicable in so many ways that just trying to nail it down to one little thing is almost impossible. Well,
in short summary, this isn't going to do it the justice to it by no means, but kind of what we're give people a little insight, this third circle theory, and it's basically taking a worldview, a perception of the world, the world's view, and then your current stance, and then the tangible items it takes to blend them together to grow. Is that a fair way to kind of put it, or how would you put it?
I would say that's a great explanation. Like you said, it's hard to do it justice because even in the few sessions we've had already, my understanding of it has even changed as we've read it, because the way it's presented, you've got the three circles, kind of different viewpoints, different ways of kind of looking at and tackling key aspects of life, and it's not just you do a few of them and then you move on to the next one. It's not step by step. It's something that you're kind of constantly working on building out, and you can have bits of one and have bits of another, and it's so very all inclusive, and it's really interesting to think about.
There's phases within the circle.
Correct.
And then there's segments that you need within that circle to be whole or complete, so to speak, in order for you to comfortably continue to move. Right. So, for example, the phases that are in circle one, the first circle, are the birth, the settler, and then the dreamer. That doesn't even cover the segments within it. That's just the phases you go through within the first circle concept.
Right.
And then as you grow, then you actually, in a sense, almost repeat that in a way for you to grow stronger, so to speak. For example, we're all kind of birthed into our life at birth. We all had to arrive here at some way. So at that arrival, how that looks at that arrival and how as we pass through things, then you as yourself, you just got recently engaged. Congratulations. There you go. So now that you're in a new birth, in a sense, of your next phase, so to speak.
Right.
So now that's going to look even different than what it looked like, 2 years ago or whatever it might be, however you want to kind of look at it. And so it's really dynamic because it applies so different to each me versus you. It applies totally different, but yet it's still all applicable.
Right.
And I think that's where like the meat, is like realizing like, wow, is that a pretty good assessment, kind of like looking at it?
Definitely. I mean, there's so many births of so many different aspects of your life. There's so many different ways of looking at that, and the birth of starting a new job, or the birth of taking a relationship to a whole sort of different level, like that is, it's almost like that process of the birth, the settler, and the dreamer. You go through each of those in so many different ways and so many different stages of life.
And then when it breaks it down, as we're studying, as we break down the segments within the circle, a great one we just were kind of generally talking about was something so simple here at Elite was our scheduling. And, scheduling's big at any company, just the coordination of it and the flow of it. And one of the segments in the first circle is environment. And that environment kind of shapes your point of view, your perception, your world, the way your perception of the world is. And then there's that look of the way the world really is. And then there's where you stand. And so somebody who's just asking for a day off to go to the dentist, for example, was the kind of example we ran into. That person only saw their environment, but it actually connects to the larger environment.
Right.
And it affects everything. So being able to see beyond your environment actually will help everybody around you continue to grow and get whatever they want, whatever that looks like, more money, more success, more fulfillment, whatever that looks like along the way.
And I personally feel like a big motivation and something that kind of drives you through the circles is that idea and that concept of, you are born into your environment and you're very much molded by it, and it's very much your vision. But as you grow through the circles, especially leading into the third circle itself.
Pull that microphone a little bit closer.
Gotcha.
It's probably getting you, but I just want to make sure.
Gotcha. As you sort of progress through the circles, the whole concept of your environment and your entourage and the things that surround you, it's sort of trying to almost break yourself out of it in a sense so that you can see and get a much better, clearer vision.
Well, in the principal concept behind the book is for you to get a better understanding of your purpose and your existence. That's the principal concept of the book. And so the way you just shared that was so elegant in a way that it lets you continue to find that purpose, so then you are growing to what your purpose is. And it's pretty neat how it's laid out. I think it's one of the best books I've ever came across. We've talked about Andy Frisella a few times, and that was one of his suggested reads. And so that's what led me personally to that direction, was his suggestion of one of the best books he's ever read. And so as I started reading it, I've shared with you and others that I've read it probably, I think, 5 or 6 times. And we've even bantered back and forth about, as we go through certain weeks, we'll reread and even reread some of the content we looked at, and we see it even that much more impactful. So it's pretty cool how good that book is.
I feel like sometimes when you're watching a TV show or you're watching something that's sort of episodic, going back and rewatching the previous one, it doesn't feel like it does too much for you. Maybe you get a little bit of something you missed, but with this book, and I think with even some of the other books we've really talked about,
right.
It's so helpful to go back and read just a little bit, just the last sort of piece that transitions into this next section that you're reading, because it helps you see that full picture so much better and explains it so much clearer.
It's really funny kind of looking back at it now, because initially I brought it out and it was like, hey, it's going to be 6 weeks. And now we're 10 weeks into it, stretching it out because it's so good. And actually, we probably have left a lot out on that first circle as we kind of sped through it, even though we spent a lot of time looking at it now, because we're in the second circle and we can't even get past one segment at a time each week when we dig into it. 100%. Because it's so much content there that is so great to apply to everywhere we look at. So it's been really cool from my perspective to have read it so many times, to have an opportunity to share it, and then to see both you and Rohan being able to receive some of the content out of it the way I'd hoped that it came out. That like, hey, this is stuff that is great. Use it however it can be used.
And I definitely appreciate, with a lot of the other books that we read, there was a lot of story-based, as we kind of talked about, had a lot of really great content as well. But the form factor that we're taking this book in, the sort of direction with the group that we get together with and us having the group conversations, I mentioned beforehand, it's so awesome that, a lot of times in book clubs or in meetings and things like that, you tend to get off topic real easy. And something so awesome about the third circle is that no matter, how far off you get on a tangent or life experience or things, it always
keeps staying like right in there.
Right.
It's so cool to see. It is really neat to see that. The first circle had 8 segments in it, and the second one has 6. Any of those kind of stand out, so to speak, more than others? I know they all do because we've been having great conversations about it. But anything you want to kind of stand out, throw out there?
I think we've definitely stuck on a couple of very specific ones. And, it's so obvious when it's a nice when it has a nice giant amount of content for us to talk about, because it always winds up taking us a full session to just try and get through. And even if it's a few pages, there's just so much good stuff in the fine print. One that we recently had, the most recent one that we talked about was habits.
Yeah,
and that one is so expansive. The way that habits relates to your life and the kind of way that you work through it is just amazing. And the way the book sort of explains what habits are, how good habits can influence your life and how bad habits can, just in all sorts of different ways. Oh, yeah. And it is a great example of what I was talking about with us kind of going off on a tangent, talking about so many great examples in the workplace and in life. And I just feel like that was one of the sessions that we just gathered the most. I feel like I left there with such a great amount of new knowledge and sort of better understanding.
Well, it was great because we had went in there with the intent to kind of finish the last 3 segments. And you and I briefly talked about it because we try to do our best to read prior and then we engage. And so the one segment after that was emotions, and we thought emotions was going to be something we would get stuck on in a sense with content, and we ended up just getting ingrained in the habits and the concept of habits and the importance of that and the styles of being proactive, to be able to kind of have an opportunity to help dictate where you're going. Right. Little things like that. And we talk about it at Elite, we think about the end of the day or the end of the process with the mindset of understanding that that's going to drive us to where we're going. And so by just having a proactive habit of trying to set that will help deliver, value and help establish better relationships and things like that. So, we're always kind of looking for, is this tangible to help us through the Elite process and through just in life in general. And it's like everything we keep talking about is like right there. So much great stuff.
Oh, definitely. And I guess just to bring some clarity to it, habits was one of the great sort of sections in the second circle, sort of a good example of what the second circle looks like and some different things we talked about with that. But even before we got there, the first circle had, I think, one of the most interesting and probably one of my personal favorite sections, which was about fear. And I thought that section about fear, talking about the different types of fear and how it affects you in different ways, and the difference between emotional fear and having this kind of logical understanding of it, and just how they relate to each other is so fantastic.
What I liked about fear is I think the recognition that fear paralyzes.
Right.
Like just recognizing it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that we walk away from it and we have fear solved, by no means. It just means we can recognize when it's creeping in, and then the other segments help support. A great example is in the first circle is it talks about entourage, the people you're around.
Right.
So if you take the people you're around and you take the environment that you're in or you've experienced and you attach fear to that, then you are paralyzed unless it's supported. A great example is when you started Elite, you had limited industry knowledge. So when you started, fear was like, I don't want to mess up. But then ideally we created a good environment. You had the good entourage of people that you're working with. And then so that brings that level of fear down to not let you be paralyzed, to not act. And then you start acting and you start growing. So that's one example that you're tangible, like you've experienced. And we've all experienced the same analogy. So it's not just you in that situation. Like I still experience it every day, whether it be fear through, when we were going into the pandemic to, what's going on right now, supply chain issues and how that's nothing like trends we've seen in the industry ever. So yes, there's general fear, but then recognizing the tools that help you overcome it, or at least not be paralyzed. At least that's the big key that I loved about fear, is it just kind of freezes you.
Definitely. And when I first started, it was I love the analogy of like a trust fall. It was like, I've had so many experiences in the past of going to do it and then just falling flat on my back. Because I never had a good entourage to catch me.
Oh yeah.
That fear of failure just becomes so intense. But once I was able to kind of get past it and learn to rely on a lot of the knowledge, and especially relying on the fact that it'll come with time, which is a hard one for me.
And that's one of the things we talked about too, is that's in the second circle, is the value of time.
And that was a fantastic one as well.
So we keep throwing them, bouncing them back and forth, and you're like, which one's better? Which one's because they all have so much meat to it, as you mentioned. I'm just going to kind of kick them out real quick. The first segment has environment, has belief. So, let's bring this one up. We talked about belief. Is it factual or is it emotional?
It's emotional. And that wasn't my first answer. My first answer was factual, because I had this concept in my head that I don't want to believe in it if I don't know it's true for sure. But the way we talked it out, and kind of the understanding that the book sort of provides, is that you base your beliefs off of how you feel about certain things, whether you want to or not. It's just, and a
lot of it's established with your environment,
right?
The people you're around, and so as you expand that environment, then you expand your knowledge to understand. At the end of the day, we can all debate certain level of what is fact and what isn't. That's a debatable discussion. But how you shape that opinion of you determining if it is factual. The shirt behind you is Tennessee orange. That's a fact based upon a color code that's established. That's the color of that shirt.
Right.
And so if you've never heard of that, once you understand what the color code looks like, then you can establish, okay, that is fact. We call that color this. But until that happens, we could emotionally argue about the color. You're just calling it orange. I'm saying it's Tennessee orange. That's what it's referred to on the color chart. And we could debate that back and forth, and then all of a sudden, you're getting emotional, and I could sit here, no, by fact, here's the color chart. If we're determining terminology by color chart, it's Tennessee orange.
And what's amazing is we can have that conversation and both be right.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to be, one person has the right answer, one person has the wrong answer.
So your facts is that it's just orange. My facts are it's Tennessee orange. So you have to establish a baseline of what you're saying is fact. And once that's established, then it just becomes emotions that you're attaching to it.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting that if you can look at what you determine as fact, and then that limits it being emotional. But a lot of people do say a belief is, I've heard it even say, it's factual and it's emotional.
Oh, yeah.
It's not really. It's only emotional by your attachment to it.
Right.
And then so through that, we talked about choice. We talked about fear, confidence, the entourage, goals, and then the big one that I think about is time. Because that's to me our most valuable asset that you can never make more of.
No, definitely. And you shared with us a few. I know you mentioned Andy Frisella a couple of times. Some awesome things that he had to say about time and time sort of being your currency, and the way that you spend it is so much more valuable than any amount of money.
Well, and we've talked about Jesse Isler a little bit. He's part ownership of the Hawks, and he's done a lot of cool things. So he's a good one to look up if you get a chance. And he has a really, really deep conversation that he is challenged with at times about how obsessed he is with his measured of time. He gives an example. I'm going to give a quick version of it. His parents lived out of the area that he lived at, and his father was getting older. So he started doing the mathematical time in his head. If my father's 80, and let's just say he lives to 90, so that's 10 years, and I see him twice a year because of his location, I'm only going to see him 20 times ever before I'll never see him again.
That's a crazy number.
So the value that he attached when he saw him was something that was very, very valuable to him.
Right.
So nothing would distract him while he was in that time, because he knew that was one less time block that he would have to ever be around them. And that's how, and it had got to a point, he had actually talked about it, he almost got obsessed with it, that he had to back off of it because everything was so urgent almost to try to really take the most for that time dedicated to that situation, because he started looking at everything that way. But you can easily do that if you break it down to that, because you can't get it back. There's no Back to the Future right now.
Right. And then the scary thing is, losing time is bad, but also recognizing exactly how much you're spending and what it is can overwhelm you just as much as realizing the time you're wasting. And
that's my struggle in a sense, is I continue to put the value of whatever the experience or situation is, it has subtracted from that bank account of time.
Right.
And it works me over sometimes, kind of like what Jesse was saying, I can't get it back. I've lost it, and I can't buy more of it, and so it's frustrating that I've lost it for that situation.
Definitely.
And then most people aren't intentionally doing that, so then it's hard for them to realize what are you getting so uptight for this one little small thing? We can just do this. And it's not that that's the intent behind it, but that's my definition and equation that I kind of look at when I'm like, crap, we did this and we wasted that, because you can't get it back.
100%. I mean, you can always work some extra hours. You can always get a second job, but you can't just turn time out of nothing.
Right. You can't go backwards to get 10 more minutes of the proposal and the engagement time that you were in.
But that's exactly what makes it so valuable.
Right.
That it's just in that moment, you get to kind of capture that and keep that. And, it's like if you had Christmas every day, if you had all the time in the world, then time wouldn't be valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's deep when we're sitting here talking about
right.
The depthness of that, and those are the types of conversations we've had when we went through it. Is how strong and impactful those are. So at this point, I'm going to end it, and then maybe we'll give some people some more. If they're interested, give us a thumbs up, share it, like it, do some of those things.
We definitely got a heck of a lot more to go, and we're still working through it. So we've got plenty more to share.
Awesome. I'm glad we hijacked this from Cole. This was good. All right. Thanks, Rhett.
All right. Thank you.